To start, I will go over the main modalities of the program for senior clinical investigators. So to translate basic scientific knowledge into applications that directly benefit patients or general healthcare, you as clinical scientists are ideally placed. From your clinical experience, you know what the system needs and what the patient needs, and because of your scientific training, you are in an ideal position to advance practice-oriented research. And indeed, a recent study by Ankaert and colleagues has shown that clinical scientists are more likely to perform use-inspired research that builds on prior insights from applied literature. And moreover, their studies are more likely to trigger applied follow-up research. Unfortunately, however, although clinical scientists could be an important motor driving translational biomedical research, in practice, they often are not at liberty to engage in such endeavors because they are fully occupied in the clinic. And this is where we at FWO provide a solution by freeing funds to release clinical scientists from their clinical duties, giving them time to perform such translational research. And the same study by Ankaert and colleagues has demonstrated that our fellows have an increased publication rate compared to their peers, and importantly, that their research focus shifts more towards a translational perspective, which can have important consequences for patients and for the healthcare system in general. An important remark to be made here is that the Senior Clinical Investigator Fellowship is a part-time fellowship only, thus ensuring that the fellow will still remain strongly embedded in the clinic at the same time. The fellowship is quite unique in this respect. It will not be paid out to the fellows themselves, but rather to the hospital to finance the clinical replacement. And usually the grant is meant for a 50% replacement, but in exceptional cases where a fellow cannot be spared from the clinic for the full 50%, there is an alternative option where the fellow will be replaced for 20% only, and then the remaining funds can be used to finance scientific or technical supporting staff. And typically this would be, for instance, a PhD student or a lab technician, but other options are also possible. Now, this 20% option should be the exception rather than the rule, and it should therefore be thoroughly motivated in the application. An example would be, for instance, a surgeon who performs very complicated procedures and who cannot simply be replaced. And in that case, this should be attested in writing by the head of the clinic. So in order to be eligible to apply, you should be recognized to practice your profession in Belgium as a medical specialist or general practitioner, or alternatively as a pharmacist specialized in clinical biology. You should be working at a university hospital affiliated to a Flemish university, and you should have a contract of indefinite duration. For general practitioners, you should be affiliated to a Flemish university in the Department of Family Medicine for the duration of the fellowship. You should spend at least 80% of your time on purely clinical activities, meaning that you're not already working as a researcher, for instance. You should hold a PhD degree with no more than 20% of seniority. And similar to all other FWO fellowships, we only allow 2 attempts to apply. But importantly, because our program underwent major revisions a few years ago, since then, in 2020, the counter was reset and you can apply twice again, irrespective of any potential earlier attempts. So the overall aim of the fellowship is to provide a platform for our fellows to establish themselves as independent researchers. The fellow has a duration of 5 years and it is renewable 2 times, meaning that in the best case, the fellow will have funding for a consecutive period of 15 years, which should give them ample time to build their own research line with long-term perspectives. Since the revision of the program, the budget has increased, so now there will be 60,000 euros per year available to finance the clinical replacement. And for general practitioners, the calculation of their annual fee will be based on the wages of a part-time lecturer at the university, taking into account the scientific seniority. In case the fellow has chosen the 20% replacement option, the remainder of the budget can be used to finance the supporting staff. And also here, the maximum amount per year will be 60,000 euros in total. And what is new since the revision is that now our first-time fellows will receive a bench fee to help them start up their research. This bench fee will amount to a maximum of 100,000 euros for the 5 years, or 20,000 per year. And for the bench fee, the same rules and regulations apply as for our other pre- and postdoctoral fellowships. So what do you need if you want to apply for this fellowship? First of all, you will need the formal commitment of both the director of the hospital as well as the dean of the faculty. So the hospital director should attest that they will provide actual clinical replacement for you. And here it is also highly recommended to already have the name of the person or the people who will be replacing you written down in the application. And second, the director should guarantee that you will be reinstated upon completion of the fellowship. The dean of the faculty, on the other hand, should attest that you will be affiliated to the university to perform research for the duration of the fellowship. You should submit your application via the e-portal on the FWO website. And because our jury consists of international experts, please make sure that your entire application, including all of the support letters and other attachments, are written in English so that the evaluators can understand them. The jury will evaluate several aspects of the application on the level of the candidate as well as the proposed research program. And for a final renewal, also the future planning after completion of the fellowship will be taken into account. So looking at these evaluation criteria in more detail, concerning the level of the candidate, for a first-time application, both the scientific experience as well as the clinical expertise are taken into consideration. Also, whether the candidate has already established connections to basic research groups that can ensure feasibility of the planned research program. Past and planned mobility will also be taken into account. And importantly, because we want to really protect the time of our fellows that they can spend on research, we ask you to provide a very clear plan regarding the substitution of the clinical tasks, which should, as mentioned, also be supported by the hospital management. For a renewal of the fellowship, the jury will evaluate the progress report of the previous term with a special focus on scientific growth and international recognition. Also, the translational nature of the research and the impact on clinical practice will be taken into account. And again, the substitution plan will be evaluated as well. Concerning the proposed research program then, the jury will assess the innovative nature of the research, the quality of the proposed approach, its feasibility, and, as mentioned before, the clinical impact, meaning that the study should be translational in nature. For a final renewal, we would like to see that the established research lines also have a long-term perspective, meaning that the hospital has plans to continue this also after the completion of the fellowship, and preferably, of course, that the fellow will remain in the driving seat to continue these research lines. Since the revision of the program, there are more stringent quality requirements attached to the renewal process. So together with the application for a renewal, fellows will also submit a progress report of the past activities, and this will be evaluated by the jury following the criteria that were just discussed on the previous slide. And importantly, in line with FWO regulations for other fellowships, there can be no second attempt if the renewal is rejected. Here you see a graphical representation of the success rate since the revision. So each year we have funds to grant 8 new fellowships, which based on the number of applications in the last round translated into a success rate of 40%. And out of those 8 successful first fellowships, we will renew 6. And out of those 6, 4 can then be renewed for a third and final period. So overall, I think you can appreciate that in comparison to other FWO programs, the success rate for the clinical fellowships is quite high. This is done intentionally because we realize, and we also know from surveys, that it is not straightforward for a full-time clinician to find the time to apply. And by having a relatively high success rate, we hope to keep the fellowship accessible and make it worth your while to apply. And then some important dates to note down. So the call is open since last week, and we expect the final submission by the 1st of March, no later than 5 p.m. via the e-portal. The results will be announced by the end of June, and we strive to provide you feedback on the application shortly thereafter. You will receive feedback regardless of the results. And if granted, the fellowship will then start on the 1st of October. Successful candidates will work under the regulations for Senior Clinical Investigator, which you can find on our website. Once you are active as a fellow, if you have not done so already, we expect from you a signed declaration specifying the details of your replacement. And then during the fellowship, you will provide 2 reports of your scientific activities, one midterm and one at the end of the term, which will be used to evaluate your renewal if applicable. And all of those reports will be assessed by the jury clinical fellowships. As most of you will be performing clinical research, I would like to point out that we expect our fellows to adhere to the European regulation on the registration and reporting of clinical trials. We at FWO fully advocate the benefits of transparency of clinical studies, and we therefore expect you not only to register your trial, but also to inform us upon inclusion of the first patient, and then obviously to report your results appropriately. Your compliance with these regulations can be taken into account during the evaluation of your final reports, and as such, it can also have consequences for your future applications at the FWO. So to conclude, here are a few additional tips and tricks on how to submit a winning application. Since the revision, the emphasis of the call is on translational research, because this is where clinical scientists can make the difference. So please make sure that your topic of choice is not only innovative, but also translational in nature. And then following the international trends to advance research assessment, the FWO is moving away from a one-sided quantitative bibliometric assessment of scientific performance towards a more broad view of a candidate's achievements. And therefore, we have widened our application form, allowing you to enter a narrative of your main achievements in a more broad sense. And on the other hand, our evaluators have also received specific instructions to take into account this wider view into the evaluation. The purpose of this fellowship is that the clinical researcher can build a research portfolio that has strong future perspectives, and therefore it is also important to us that the hospital will engage itself to continue what the fellows started. So for a final renewal, please make sure that this commitment is also attested in the proposal. In order for your application to have a higher chance of making the cut, we highly recommend you to check the score grid that the jury members will use to evaluate your proposal. The score grid contains all of the evaluation criteria and can be found on the Senior Clinical Investigator page on the FWO website. And I would suggest that you try to assess your application using this score grid, and if possible, that you ask one of your peers to do the same to make sure that you check all of the boxes. And as this is a highly competitive call, really try to score in the most right-hand side of the scoring grid where the most excellent scores can be found. Because we received several questions regarding ethics, I would like to briefly highlight the FWO's ethical approval policy. Please note that we do not require you to obtain ethical approval of the proposed research upon submission of your application. The only exception to this rule is if you're planning experimentation on non-human primates. In that case, ethical approval is required before the evaluation meeting. What we do ask all of you, however, is to complete an ethics questionnaire as part of the application form. The questionnaire is meant to help both us and you to know whether ethics approval of your study will be needed at a certain point. And it is then only after your fellowship has been granted that you should request ethical approval. And in most cases, this approval can be obtained right before starting these particular activities. However, for experimentation on human embryos, fetuses, embryonic stem cells, or non-human primates, the approval should be obtained before starting any project-related activities. Please note that it could be that additional rules and regulations apply at your own host institutions, so please contact the relevant services for more information in due course. And then for some final advice, make sure that you obtain all of the required signatures from the hospital director and the dean and the required attestations, for instance, the certificate that you're recognized to practice in Belgium. If possible, provide the details of your clinical replacement in full, because this will give you bonus points, as we've discussed and as you will see in the score grid. And finally, make sure that you've also prepared or updated your Personalia page on the FWO platform. So you can find additional information and more details on our webpage, but please don't hesitate to contact us also via our email address met@fwo.be if you have any remaining questions or concerns.